It all started with a missing wedding ring. Such a small thing, really. Something most people wouldn't even notice. But it stuck with me for weeks. Sarah had worn that platinum band every single day since our wedding 12 years ago. She would twist it absent-mindedly when lost in thought or fidget with it during meetings. It was just one of those little quirks I loved about her. Until one day, it was gone. "Where's your ring?" I asked casually over our Thursday night dinner, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced up from her plate of barely touched salmon, her expression unreadable. "Oh, it must have slipped off when I was washing my hands," she said almost too quickly. "Probably fell down the drain at work." I set my fork down, studying her face. "Did you check the drain?" I pressed. Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of irritation cross her face. "I didn't want to upset you," she replied, her voice a little too sweet. "It's just a ring, Jack. I'll get another one." I didn't say anything more that night. But the next morning, while Sarah was at work, I pulled apart every sink in our house. Drains, pipes, everything. There was no ring. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just lying. She thought I was too stupid to catch on. The anger simmered under my skin, but I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it really was an accident. Maybe I was overthinking it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then the other changes started. Sarah began staying late at work more often, sometimes not coming home until long after Tommy, our 9-year-old son, had gone to bed. She'd started dressing differently too. Gone were her comfortable Target sweaters and practical flats. Instead, she was wearing sleek designer outfits and 4-inch heels. Her makeup got heavier, more dramatic. "It's because of this big client project at work," she'd say, brushing off my questions. "You know how these things are." But I didn't know how these things were. Sarah had never cared that much about her appearance before, at least not for the office. Our conversations, which used to flow so easily over morning coffee and evening walks, started feeling formal and distant. She'd snap at me over little things, like leaving the dishwasher open or forgetting to take out the trash. The Sarah I knew, the one who laughed at my dad jokes and sang off-key to Journey songs in the car, started to feel like a stranger. One day, as I sat at our kitchen island replaying her words about the ring in my head, a thought struck me like a punch to the gut. She's lying. And if she's lying about this, what else is she lying about? I decided right then and there I was going to find out. It didn't take long for the cracks to deepen. One Tuesday afternoon, I forgot some important client files at home and swung back during lunch to grab them. As I walked up to our front door, I heard Sarah. Asians were peppered with inside jokes, flirty one-liners, and details about their meetups. One message stood out. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. But I didn't stop there. I forwarded screenshots of everything to myself. Texts, photos, even voice memos she'd sent him. Then I deleted the evidence of my snooping and put her phone back exactly where I'd found it. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. I installed a GPS tracker on her car. It wasn't hard. Sarah was always too preoccupied with her phone to notice much else. I also called my buddy Mike, a retired NYPD detective. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was him. When I explained the situation, Mike let out a low whistle. "Sounds messy," he said, "but I'll help you, as long as you're ready to deal with whatever we find." "I'm ready," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Mike got to work, pulling up every bit of information he could find about Brandon. It didn't take long for him to piece things together. "He's married," Mike told me over the phone a few days later. "Works at Goldman Sachs. Looks like they've been colleagues for a while, but it's not professional." Hearing it confirmed from someone else made my blood boil. Sarah wasn't just sneaking around with another man. She was jeopardizing our family for someone who had just as much to lose. Mike gave me everything: Brandon's address in the Upper East Side, his wife's name, and his work schedule. He even managed to find photos of Brandon and Sarah together at various corporate events. I stared at the evidence, feeling a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was real. Sarah was cheating, and Brandon was the guy. But instead of confronting her, I kept quiet. I needed more. The GPS tracker proved to be the final nail in the coffin. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as Sarah's late nights at work became dinners at quiet restaurants. Hours spent parked at places she had no reason to be. It was all right there, spelled out for me in timestamps and locations. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One night, Sarah left for what she called a team dinner, dressed in a way that didn't scream professionalism. I followed her. She drove to a small, dimly lit bistro in Greenwich Village. I parked a safe distance away, but this time, I didn't just sit in the car. Something inside me snapped. I needed to see it up close. I walked into the bistro and scanned the room. There they were, tucked into a corner booth. Sarah was leaning toward Brandon, her smile wide and her laughter filling the small space between them. They were completely absorbed in each other, so much so that they didn't even notice me sit down a few tables away. For a few minutes, I just watched. Sarah's hand brushed against his arm as she spoke, and Brandon leaned in, hanging on her every word. They looked like a couple on a romantic date, not two people sneaking around behind their spouses' backs. My stomach churned, but not with jealousy. It was something colder, disgust. I instinctively pulled out my phone and took a few pictures. I wanted to storm over, to slam the photos and text down on their table and watch the color drain from her face. But then I realized something. I didn't need to do that. This wasn't a game anymore, and I was tired of playing detective. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's when Sarah finally noticed me. Her face froze, her smile vanishing in an instant. She stared at me wide-eyed, her mouth opening slightly like she was about to say something. But I didn't give her the chance. I just turned and walked out. As I stepped into the cool Manhattan night air, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from her. "You're misunderstanding everything. I can explain. Please don't be upset. I'm coming home and we can talk." I ignored it. Driving home, I felt an odd sense of calm. The game was over, and now it was time to set my plan into motion. Sarah thought she could smooth things over with words, but she had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead. When I got home, my mind was already set. I had everything prepared, the evidence, the documents, the plan. I was ready to make my move, to finally take control of the situation. But as I sat in the kitchen mentally rehearsing my next steps, the sound of tires screeching in the driveway pulled me out of my thoughts. Sarah burst through the door moments later, her face flushed and frantic. "Jack," she said breathlessly, "why aren't you answering my calls? We need to talk." I stayed seated, my hands clasped on the table. "Go ahead," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated, clearly thrown off by my lack of reaction. "Look, I know what you think you saw tonight, but you're wrong," she stammered. "Brandon and we're just friends. That's all it was, a friendly meeting." I tilted my head slightly, watching her scramble for an explanation. "A friendly meeting?" I repeated, my tone flat. "Yes," she said, stepping closer. "It was completely innocent. You know me, Jack. I'd never do anything to hurt you." "Never do anything to hurt me?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "So all the late nights, the missing ring, the lies, they're all in my head, right?" She flinched but quickly recovered, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been working so hard lately, and I know I've been distant, but that doesn't mean anything. You're just paranoid." Her voice grew sharper, more defensive, and I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my composure, "I'm giving you one chance. Just one. Tell me the truth." Her eyes darted away for a split second before locking back on mine. "I am telling you the truth," she insisted. "Brandon is just a colleague. We were talking about work, that's all. You're making this into something it's not." The audacity of her words made my blood boil. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, your lies are getting heavy. Too heavy. And they're about to crush everything." She frowned, her confusion evident. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I'd been waiting to call. "Jack, who are you calling?" she asked, her voice trembling. I met her gaze as the line connected. "It's over," I said into the phone. "Go ahead and proceed." When I hung up, Sarah's face was pale, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "What did you just do?" I stood up slowly, towering over her. "You'll find out soon enough," I said, my voice cold. For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips trembling as she tried to form a response. "Jack," she said finally, her tone softening. "I know I've made mistakes, but this is too far. You don't need to do this. Let's talk, let's fix this." I didn't respond. I just walked to the living room and sat down, waiting. The first message came within minutes. Sarah's phone buzzed loudly on the counter. She glanced at it, her brow furrowing as she unlocked the screen. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then came another message. And another. Her colleagues. Brandon. His wife. Her hands started shaking as she scrolled through the flood of notifications. "No," she whispered, her voice growing more frantic. "No, no, no. What did you do?" I stood and walked to the kitchen where she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "I told you, Sarah," I said bitterly. "Your lies were too heavy. Now everyone knows the truth." Her face crumpled as she read the messages. Details of her affair with Brandon were spreading through her workplace like wildfire. Brandon's wife, a prominent social media influencer, had received the evidence as well. And from the looks of it, she wasn't taking it quietly. Sarah's breathing quickened, and she turned to me, her eyes filled with panic. "Jack, you didn't have to do this," she pleaded. "We could have handled this privately. Please, we can still fix this." I let out a humorless laugh. "Fix this, Sarah? This isn't something you fix. This is something you face." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder with a theatrical flourish. I set it on the table in front of her. On top, I placed her wedding ring, the one she claimed had been lost down the drain. Her eyes darted between the ring and the folder, tears streaming down her face. "Jack," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't give her a chance to say more. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she cried, her voice breaking. "To Tommy," I said over my shoulder. "He's at your parents' house. They deserve to know who's are. Equally to blame for destroying their grandson's family." The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off her sobs. As I drove through the quiet suburban streets, my phone kept buzzing. Messages from mutual friends, co-workers, even our country club acquaintances. Word was spreading fast. Hashtag corporate affair was already trending locally, thanks to Brandon's wife's massive following. By the time I reached Sarah's parents' house in Westchester, the weight in my chest had started to lift. Tommy was there, playing video games in the basement, blissfully unaware of how his world was about to change. Seeing his carefree smile reminded me why I was doing this. Not out of spite, but because we both deserve better. Sarah's parents greeted me warmly, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I asked to speak with them privately, leaving Tommy to his game. "What's going on, Jack?" her mother asked, concern etched into her face. I took a deep breath and handed them the folder. "You need to see this," I said quietly. Their expressions shifted as they flipped through the photos, texts, and screenshots. Her father's face darkened, his jaw tightening. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth as she gasped. This can't be true," her father said, his voice trembling with anger. "It is," I said, my voice steady. "I've been gathering evidence for weeks. Sarah has been lying to all of us." Her mother broke down into tears, shaking her head. I don't understand. Why would she do this? You've always been so good to her. I don't have an answer for that, I said, my tone bitter. But I thought you should know before things get worse. I didn't stay long. Tommy was too young to understand what was happening, and I didn't want him caught in the middle. I kissed him goodbye, promising we'd spend time together soon. By the time I got back to the house, chaos was in full swing. Sarah was pacing the living room, her phone glued to her ear. No, it's not true, she hissed into the phone. I don't know how this got out, but it's not what it looks like. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her confidence unraveling. She didn't notice me walking until I dropped my keys on the counter. She turned, her eyes wild and tear-streaked. Jack, she started, rushing toward me. Please, please, we need to talk. I raised a hand to stop her. There's nothing left to talk about, Sarah. You don't understand, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Brandon's wife is calling his boss. Everyone at work is talking about it. My job, my reputation, it's all falling apart. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You mean the reputation you built on lies? The job you risked for an affair? Sounds like consequences, Sarah. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the nearest chair. Jack, I know I made mistakes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you didn't have to do this. You've destroyed everything. No, Sarah, I said coldly. You destroyed everything when you decided I wasn't enough for you. I just made sure the truth came out. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs filling the room. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it vanished as quickly as it came. This was her mess to deal with now. I walked over to the table where I'd left the divorce papers. Without a word, I slid them across to her. Sign these, I said firmly, and this can be over faster than it started. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. You don't mean this, she whispered. We can fix it, Jack. For Tommy's sake, we can fix it. I shook my head. Tommy deserves parents who respect each other, who tell the truth. This isn't something you fix, Sarah. This is where it ends. The days following my departure were nothing short of chaos for Sarah. The evidence I'd sent out had made its rounds, and the fallout hit her like a tidal wave. At work, whispers turned into full-blown accusations. Her bosses launched an internal investigation, suspecting that her relationship with Brandon had compromised confidential information. While I couldn't confirm whether she'd actually leaked anything, the mere perception of impropriety was enough. Her $200,000 VP position at Morgan Stanley crumbled beneath her feet. Her colleagues, once eager to join her for happy hours and charity galas, suddenly couldn't remember her name. Brandon's situation wasn't much better. His wife, with her 500,000 Instagram followers, made sure of that. She'd posted a scathing expose, complete with screenshots and a tearful video that went viral in Manhattan's financial circles. Goldman Sachs didn't take kindly to the publicity. Both Sarah and Brandon's careers, carefully built over 15 years, began to crumble under the weight of their actions. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings for our divorce started quickly. I wasn't interested in dragging it out, but I wasn't going to let Sarah walk away unscathed either. During mediation, her lawyer tried to play the sympathy card. My client has lost her career, he argued, straightening his tie. She deserves a fair share of the assets to rebuild her life. My lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Diana, just smiled. She pulled out the stack of evidence I'd gathered. Your client destroyed her own career, Diana replied coolly. And Mr. Thompson has been more than generous, considering the circumstances. In the end, I walked away with most of what mattered. The house in Greenwich, our savings, and my untarnished reputation. Sarah was left with far less than she'd hoped for. Yet despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to be completely ruthless. Tommy still loved his mother, and I didn't want him to grow up resenting either of us. So I agreed to shared custody, even though I knew it would mean seeing her regularly. Sarah, however, struggled to adapt to her new reality. The weight of public judgment, the loss of her career, and the strain of our divorce left her emotionally drained. She wasn't the confident, composed woman I once knew. Now she seemed lost, barely holding herself together for Tommy's sake. She moved from our 5-bedroom colonial to a small apartment in White Plains. Her designer clothes were replaced by department store basics. The woman who once commanded boardrooms now worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance firm. It was the only job she could find after the scandal. I did my best to maintain civility for Tommy's sake, but every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also a hint of sadness for what could have been. After everything was finalized, I felt exhausted but free. 12 years of marriage reduced to legal papers, signed and sealed. Sarah had made her choices, and now she was living with the fallout. For me, it was time to move forward. Tommy became my anchor through it all. Despite the shared custody arrangement, I made it my mission to be the steady, dependable parent he could count on. We spent weekends exploring Central Park, catching Yankees games, and building elaborate Lego cities in the living room. Work became another source of stability. Without the emotional weight dragging me down, I poured myself into my career. The results spoke for themselves. I received a promotion to senior vice president within months, along with a substantial pay increase. It felt good to be recognized for my hard work, especially after feeling invisible for so long. But life wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond being Sarah's husband. I took up photography, capturing sunsets over the Hudson and candid moments with Tommy. I started hitting the gym again, not out of vanity, but because it gave me a sense of control over my life. I joined a divorced dad support group, where I met guys who'd been through similar situations. Their stories helped me realize I wasn't alone. 6 months after the divorce, I met Rachel at a charity event for Tommy's school. She was a pediatrician, divorced herself, with a daughter Tommy's age. We started talking about our kids, and somehow ended up discussing our favorite true crime podcast. The conversation flowed easily, without pretense or hidden agendas. Rachel was different from Sarah in every way that mattered. She was genuine, transparent, and completely comfortable in her own skin. We took things slow, coffee dates, long walks in the park, and time spent simply enjoying each other's company. She didn't try to fix me or fill a void. She just met me where I was, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed to sink further into the mess she created. Her reputation never fully recovered. The investigation at Morgan Stanley had ended with her dismissal and a sealed agreement that essentially blacklisted her from the financial sector. Her personal life didn't fare much better. Friends who once sang her praises turned their backs. Even her parents, while supportive of her role as a mother, couldn't hide their disappointment. And then there was Brandon. Whatever fantasy they'd built together crumbled as soon as the truth came out. His wife left him, taking their 3 kids and half his assets. His career at Goldman Sachs imploded under the weight of the scandal. Last I heard, he'd moved to Chicago to start over. Sarah tried reaching out a few times, usually late at night, when the weight of her choices seemed heaviest. "I miss our life," she'd text. "I miss who we were." But who we were died the moment she chose to betray everything we'd built. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction in seeing their lives unravel. But my focus wasn't on them anymore. It was on my future, on Tommy's future, and on building something real with Rachel. 1 year after the divorce, I took Tommy to his favorite pizza place in Brooklyn. As we sat there, him chattering about his latest Minecraft creation, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the window. We were both smiling, genuinely happy. That's when I knew. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted leads you to everything you actually need. The ring that started it all sits in a small box in my desk drawer now. A reminder that trust, once broken, reveals truths we might not be ready to face, but also a reminder that endings, even painful ones, can lead to better beginnings. Looking back, I don't regret how things played out. Exposing Sarah's lies wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and my life. For anyone going through something similar, here's what I've learned. Don't let betrayal define you. Stand up for yourself, but don't lose yourself in anger. Focus on what truly matters: your peace, your future, and the people who genuinely care about you. Life doesn't always go as planned, but sometimes the detours lead to something better. For me, that's exactly what happened. And